Welcome back everyone. Following on from the System Setup 101 lesson, this one is going to be getting into a bit of detail, but not too much, on operators. Just a quick rundown of what to expect over the next, hour or so. We will start with a little overview of what operators are in BPOS. Now I know that we've already been sort of minimally introduced to operators in the last lesson, but I'll explain more about them in case you do have any questions. Along with that, we'll discuss how the operator list itself is structured, or how it can be structured with operators being placed into operator groups and how those groups can be organized. Then we'll get into how to actually add operator groups and individual operators to those groups. And we will finish with a somewhat extensive, but not an exhaustive look at operator privileges and configurations themselves. As you'll come to see, we do have dozens of operator privileges that can be set to either grant or restrict operator access throughout the system. So we'll just be doing sort of an overview or introduction to them today and highlighting some of the key ones, and most of the others will be covered in other respective lessons in this course as we come to them. So without further ado then, what are operators? To really simplify it, operators are the people who will need to log in and use BPOS. That goes for logging into and using both back office and SmartPOS workstations. So even if an operator will only ever be using one or the other, they will still need their own login, meaning their own operator record in the system needs to be created. Now, while we will not be covering a component called operator clocking in this course, if your organization is using operator clocking, you will need an operator record for all staff that are going to be clocking in, whether they're actually ever going to be using back office or SmartPOS for other things or not. They will still need an operator record created to clock in if the clocking component is being used. So even if there's culinary or other staff that may never actually really be using SmartPOS, they will still need that operator record created in the system. Which brings up the point that an operator record should be created in back office for each individual user. I know from experience that some venues do not always operate that way, and they may do something where, let's say, a group of operators share a login, or there's like a community swipe card or something like that for accessing and using the till. Best practice and recommendation is to not do anything like that, especially if you would like to have some level of security at the till, where we can track what are called operators key logs and be able to see exactly who has done what at the till. We'll get into that another lesson. But also, if operators are going to be assigned to till drawers and be responsible for that drawer, obviously each operator is going to need their own login. Not only that, from the security and financial side of things, but from an analytical and performance perspective, it certainly helps to be able to report on individual operators' sales and activities. So, knowing that each individual operator will be using the system, who will be using the system, needs their own operator record created, we are probably going to need to create quite a few. You may be wondering how that's done. It's done within the operator list. And that may bring up another question. What's the operator list? That's a good question. We very briefly looked at it in the last lesson, but if we look in back office here, if we head to the maintenance menu, this is where we can maintain a number of our lists of records, including the operator list. First thing I should point out before even getting into too much detail yet is that you may have noticed in your system, if you've come and looked in here, that there is some stuff in here already. So when a new database is initially created, there will be these three operator groups created by default, which are called parent groups. The highest level of this tree structure, but more on that in a minute. We've got management, we've got staff, we've got support staff. And you can see that within these three groups, there are also 4 operators that have been created by default to get the database started with. We've got a sample manager, a new sample operator, and in support staff, we've got master setup and support. These are only intended to be used for initial admin and then ongoing support respectively here. So you may have noticed I mentioned it in the last lesson that I have been logged in as master setup, and you probably have been up until now as well. Alright, so why the operator groups? Why this tree structure? Why not just have a long list of operators? We can have that, we'll get to that a bit later. Each operator must belong to an operator group though, it's just how the system was designed. Don't overthink it. Operator groups are really just used as a method of administration or organizing operators who share the same or similar roles. By having them in groups, those groups can also be used to filter some information for us in back office reports, and when we come to reports in some upcoming lessons, you'll see how those filters can be used. But for example, let's say we have an operator group for bartenders and a separate operator group for waitstaff. We can compare and see which group as a whole is selling maybe more bottles of wine, just one basic example there. But the groups can be set up however you'd like. If your organization wants to split up staff by job role and then subgroups that split those up by seniority, that could be one way to do it. Or maybe by job role and then subgroups for the shifts that they typically work, so AM and PM type of thing. Or maybe parent groups for shifts, so a parent group for AM employees and a parent group for PM employees or something like that. And then we could have subgroups for each job role. Number of different ways that the operator list can be structured. As we saw with the product sorts and types in the last lesson, this is one of the many areas in our system that our system setup where each organization will be different, and that really is the reason that the operator list itself is quite customizable, as is the product list, which you'll see in the next lesson. Now, another advantage of having operators placed into groups is that we have an option that I'll show you in a minute where the settings can be set at the operator group level, and then operators within the group can adopt the settings of their group. Like I said, that's optional, so if we don't want to do that, we can control each individual operator's privilege settings separately, but I'll show you how that's done. But yeah, by being able to control operator settings from the group level, the more operators who can be set up at the operator group level and then subsequently adopt their group settings will greatly reduce the time and effort that's required to set up and maintain operators in the long run. But we won't get to that in just a bit. Before we get into the operator settings themselves, we need to talk a bit more about this tree structure, and then we will create a few more operator groups as well. First, I'll just make sure that the full tree option is selected here. I'll explain more about these options after we add some groups. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is no right or wrong way to structure the operator groups in your database, but there are some general rules and guidelines, best practices to follow. For starters, individual operators can only be added to the lowest group on a branch, or the lowest subgroup, or the childmost group of a parent group, however you want to think of it. Because of that rule, that also means that subgroups cannot be added to a group that already has individual operator records in it. For example, if I tried to add a new group to this management group, which has an operator in it, I will not be able to. If I do add new group, I'm going to get a warning prompt there letting me know that I cannot add a subgroup to that because it's got an operator in it. There is a workaround for this though. If we go into the group and we open up the sample manager here and we temporarily change the operator group that this operator sits in, so I'll just change that maybe to staff for now, and save that. Now the management group here is empty, and I can add some subgroups to it. So let me just add a couple here. Maybe we'll go with senior management. And I'll add another one, and we'll call it, actually I'll call it shift supervisors. There we go. Okay. What I'll do then is I'll go back to that sample managers group, and we will put them into senior management. Cool. So now we've got a parent group with 2 subgroups, and we've got an operator in one of those subgroups. Now, if I select the management group though, and I try to add a new operator to it, I will not be able to, because this parent group has some subgroups. So, as you can see, we can only have operators in the lowest subgroups and can only add subgroups to groups that don't have any individual operator records in them. I'll just do the same thing for staff. I will move the sample new operator temporarily. Just move them to support staff for now. And I'll add to staff. Let's do a subgroup called bartenders. I'll add some subgroups. Oops. Bartenders. I'll add some subgroups to that. We'll do lunch bartenders. To the lunch bartenders group, I'll add a couple of groups. By the way, we can also right click and I can do add new group under. And I will do senior lunch bar. And we will do junior lunch bar. I think you get the idea. I'll pause the recording here. I'll add a few more groups to our list here, and then I will be back in just a second. Alright, so I've added a number of additional operator groups here to the management parent group. We've got finance, marketing, we had senior management, shift supervisors already, and I added stock control with a couple of subgroups there, junior stock control, senior stock control, and then to the staff parent group, added a number of groups for different shifts, dinner bartenders, lunch bartenders, and culinary, front desk and hosts, retail, and then a few groups and subgroups for wait staff as well. Let me just move that sample new operator back to one of these staff groups. We'll add them to lunch wait staff. Cool. So there we go. We now have a bit more of a tree, and some of this might make a bit more sense. By the way, I've gone at most 4 levels deep here, or 4 tree branches with these subgroups under bartenders, which itself is a subgroup of staff, which itself is a subgroup of the base operator group. So we've got base operator group, staff, bartenders, dinner bartenders, and then we've got junior, senior, and training bar, which are 4 levels deep there, 4 branches out. But if your database doesn't need to be branched out to that extent, or conversely, maybe does need to be branched out more, have at it. Just an example here of some things that we can do. But with these groups all created now, these radio buttons at the top for full tree, list only, and hide list will be easier to explain. So the full tree is exactly that. It's what we're looking at now. It'll show us every parent group and subgroup in the database. And I haven't mentioned, but you can probably tell that they are listed alphabetically. Then this list only option, if I select that, is going to hide any and all parent groups. It's only going to show the bottommost branch subgroups, if that makes sense. So in other words, only the groups that can have individual operators in them, even though most of these are going to be empty for now because I've just added them and they don't have any operators in them. But they will be the lowest branched operator groups that we've got, the ones that can hold operators within them. Also alphabetized when we're showing the list only, by the way. And the hide list option does just that. no groups will be shown at all. It will just be one collective list of all of the database's operators. Speaking of operators, we should add a few so you can see how it's done, and then we'll get into the operator privileges themselves. Now, as far as the process goes for adding operators, there are two different ways to do it. We can add a new operator from scratch, so the operator record or form or maintenance window or whatever we want to call it. By the way, I'll use terms like that sort of interchangeably throughout this course. But anyway, for to start from scratch, the form or the record will just be completely blank when we start. Then there is an option to copy an existing operator, which sort of streamlines the process and will save some time. A few other notes along with that option, but yeah, let's do the non-copy option first. Let me just go back to the full tree here. First thing we'll need to do is select the operator group from the list that we'd like to add the new operator to. So I'll go with senior management here. If we do choose the wrong group by mistake, that's a-okay. We've already seen how easy it is to move an operator from one group to another. But then we would just click add new operator from the top. And just like that, we've got our new completely blank operator maintenance form. Now I know this looks just like the operator group form because it is. And that's how we can use the group settings option here. In fact, this option is on by default when we add a new operator to a group without copying an existing one, and it is a great bit of time saving that's built right in for us. But whereas for groups, we only need to enter a name to be able to save the record, as you saw. That's what this asterisk here is for. For individual operator records, at a bare minimum, we'll need to add an operator name as well as an operator number. So we'll just call this one, go with Sammy, the senior manager. Why not? Simple enough. As for the operator number, this can be anything except for one that already exists in the database. Yes, each one does have to be unique because this is the number that operators will be using to log into the tills and to clock in if the clocking module is being used. So I'll just give them a number here. And yeah, obviously there's a lot more that can be added and changed, and we'll get to that momentarily. But for now, if we just wanted to quickly create this operator from scratch while using the group settings, we'd be done, and we can click OK to save it. I do, however, just want to point out a couple things while we're here regarding this use group settings flag. First is just to be mindful when configuring the groups themselves of any subgroups that may be using their parent group settings as well. For example, if for this operator we're going to use the group settings of its group called senior management, if that subgroup called senior management also has this flag turned on, then it's getting its settings from its parent group and then subsequently handing them down to this operator. So, for example, if I just quickly save that, if we go into the senior management group, it is indeed using its group settings, which means it is adopting its settings from this group. So anything that we set here is going to be then handed down to this senior management group because that use group settings flag is on. And if this use group settings flag is on also, it's going to be adopting just down the chain like that. So if we were then to change some of the settings for the parent management group here, the changes would filter all the way down. Also, if the use group settings flag is on for an operator and we move the operator to another group, the operator settings will immediately be updated to use its new group settings. We do probably want that to happen, but still it's something just to keep in mind. The other thing regarding this flag is that when it's on, if I tab through here, notice that all of these tabs are going to be grayed out, meaning they cannot be edited because that flag is on, which obviously is the point of using it. But one thing to note is that nothing will ever be used from the header section or on the details and address tab, so that's why those are not grayed out, or at least not most of this section is grayed out. And if we do decide that we want to change something for an individual operator separate from the rest of the group, we just need to turn that flag off, which will re-enable the tab settings within each of these tabs, so we can then make our individual changes for the operator. And if we decide that at some point we do want to turn the use group settings flag back on, we can do that. At that point, the operator record would immediately revert to using the group settings. Of course, prior to saving that, or prior to saving any changes that we make within the operator record, we could cancel to not save those changes, but again, just something to keep in mind regarding using this flag. But anyway, I digress. We have decided to use the group settings, of course, here for our Sammy Senior Manager and our operator number and first name. Who needs a last name anyway? Not Cher, not Madonna, certainly not sample Sammy Senior Manager here, that's for sure. So I'll just go ahead and click OK, and we've got our new operator record added to the list. More specifically, it's been added to the operator group that we had initially selected. So that was creating a new operator from just blank using this option up here, or if we did a right click and we could go, oh, sorry, my mistake, I'm thinking of products. Cool. Anyway, as for copying an existing operator, when adding new operators manually to the database from back office, copying an existing is always going to be the easiest way to add a new operator, just whenever possible. Especially if operator custom fields are being used. Haven't mentioned custom fields yet, and we actually will not be getting to them in this course, but I'll just mention them anyway while we're here in Operators 101. What operator custom fields are is they are custom flags, some custom date fields, custom number fields, and custom text fields that can be added onto a separate tab on the operator record that will show in the operator form as custom info. And all those custom fields can all be defined in the system. They're fully customizable. If any of those custom fields are created and being used, they will not be included when the group settings are being used, the use group settings flag. But when we are copying an existing operator to create a new one, we will have the option to also copy any custom field values. Anyway, a bit off topic there, but just wanted to mention that. But to add a new operator by copying an existing operator, we just need to locate the existing one from the list, whichever group it's in, however the list is showing. I will just go to our lunch await staff. I think, yep, that's where I've got this sample new operator saved that I would like to copy. And I do just first want to turn off this use group settings flag and change some of these settings just to demonstrate what will and will not be copied. So let's just add some things in here. I'll add a phone number and I'll add an address, or at least a street name. And I will change a few, let's just change some till privileges here. Cool, so with that done, I'll save that. And what we can do then is right click on the operator record from the list and click copy highlighted operator as new operator. So similar to when we created the new operator from scratch, we are presented with a new operator maintenance form for a currently unnamed operator. So we'll need to fill these things in. Again, in order to save this, we'll need to add at least an operator number and a first name. Call this guy Bill. Of course, again, additional fields and settings can be completed prior to saving, but we'll get to those next. Before I do save this new operator record, I just want to point out a couple things regarding the copying of the existing operator. Most of the settings will transfer over when we've copied an existing operator to a new operator, we can see that the use group settings flag is off because it was off for the operator that we copied. And if I tab through, we can see that all of the configurations on these tabs are the same as they were for the copied operator, including the till privilege flags that we turned on. However, as with the use group settings, there are several operator settings that are never copied, which include the operator number and the card number, the first and last name, any password, and address details, any operator comment, any operator clocking jobs if those have been added and were being used. But all those things will never be copied when we copy an existing operator. So we've potentially just saved ourselves a ton of time with both options for creating new operators by taking advantage of both the use group settings flag and the ability to copy operators. Just to show you some examples there of how we can do that. But anyway, I will just click OK to save that operator, and there we go. We have another new operator added to our list. Before we get into the operator settings themselves, I just want to make a couple last points about the use group settings flag. One is that when operators are in the same group together, they most likely share the same job role. So not only will that flag being on save time by copying the group settings, it's also going to keep the settings consistent from one operator to another within that same group, so that one bartender or one senior bartender has the same operator privileges as the next senior bartender, just for example. And the second point being that maintenance time and effort will be reduced when we need to admin operators in the future. So will need to make changes to the group for most settings, not to individual operators that are using that flag. Alright, so now that we've seen how to add operator groups and individual operator records themselves, let's have a look at all of the operator settings themselves. As I mentioned at the start, we certainly don't have time to get through all of them in depth in this lesson, but we'll cover an overview and the most important ones today. I'll open an operator record in a second, but I just want to make the point to mention that it really doesn't matter which operator we look at for now. As we go through the settings, it will become apparent that different operators with different roles in the business will have different operator privileges based on their responsibilities, the activities that they need to carry out throughout day-to-day operations, so on and so forth. The main point, and this does tie directly into how the operator list is structured into groups and using the group settings, but the main point is that we can control to a very high degree and at a very granular level who can do what within the system. So let's have a look, and I will just open the operator that we just created there. By the way, when an operator record is open for editing, you may have noticed this. After it's been saved, we will have the same settings and configurations that are there when it is initially created. Now, up until now, I've mostly been referring to these operator settings as operator privileges. Those terms can be used interchangeably, but keep in mind that these are not all privileges. So even when we say operator privileges, not all of these are privileges. While most of them are indeed used to grant access to an area of back office or to allow an operator to perform an activity or a task, there are a handful of them that are scattered throughout that are actually restrictions. And we'll get to some of those in a minute because there are a couple that are very impactful. For now, as you've probably caught on, I would certainly hope so, the operator settings are all split out into multiple tabs, and within the tabs themselves, settings are further grouped for better organization, making them easier to find and easier to administrate. We've already looked at a couple fields in the header section, but there's a few more notes to make here. Firstly, you would have noticed that the header section does remain in view no matter which tab is selected, so that we can always reference which operator we are editing at the moment. A few other notes here. The operator number we've already covered. It is required, and operators will use that number to log into SmartPOS and into back office. The card number you can see here, even though when we created this operator, only entered an operator number for it, we did not enter a card number. It will initially default to be the same as the operator number that's been saved, but we can change that if it's being used. It is optional. It'll be set to, or it should be set to, the number or string of characters from any RFID device that's going to be scanned for logging in. The use group settings flag we've covered in depth already, so I'll leave that alone. And the first and last name are obviously exactly that. Keep in mind that the last name field is optional here as well. And a password is also optional, at least by default, to save an operator record. But don't forget about the venue security flags that we looked at in the last lesson, which can factor in to determine some stricter security compliance, where we can enforce that operators will need to set one when they first log in. We don't need to set one when we create the operator, but if those venue level flags are on, when an operator logs in for the first time, they would need to enter one. And we can also, remember, optionally enforce complex passwords. Just to be clear as well, that passwords are for back office only. They're not necessary for logging into SmartPOS. Cool, then we come to the operator group, and we've seen already how this can be used to move an operator from one group to another operator group. And these created and last date fields are exactly what they say they are. They're not editable, they're just used for showing that information for us for reference, so we can see the exact time that this operator record was created, and they've obviously never completed a sale because we just created them about 10 minutes ago. Cool. Then we come to the inactive flag, and we will take time to go through the concept of making records inactive, because this same concept is used throughout back office for a number of database records, including products and suppliers, among others, in addition to operators. You may have noticed that we do not have the option to delete an operator record. You won't find any option to do it from the operator record itself, and there's nothing on the operator list that allows for it anywhere either. The reasoning for that, you might be able to guess, has to do with historical reporting. So let me give you a simple example. Suppose we have an operator, let's say it's Bill here, and we hired Bill. He comes in for his first shift, he processes a sale, and then he decides that maybe this line of work isn't for him, so he quits. If we were to delete Bill's operator record, what happens to the sale that he processed? Which operator would it then report to? What happens to the sale? What happens to the products, the quantities of products that he sold? We would certainly run into some issues. And imagine if Bill worked for us for longer, maybe weeks, months, even years, processing potentially thousands of transactions. That issue would then be compounded exponentially with what happens to all of that data. So to combat that issue, really making it a non-issue, we cannot delete operator records, we can only make them inactive. So we can enable this flag to make an operator inactive, which means that they will be hidden in the operator list and won't be able to log into the system. And again, notice this lovely salmon color that the record takes on. I believe we saw this either earlier in this lesson or in the last lesson. But yeah, there is a practical use case for making operators inactive also. Suppose that Bill maybe is a seasonal employee that works in the venue during summer breaks from university, and at the end of the season we make his record inactive, essentially suspending it from being able to do anything in the system or on SmartPOS. And when the next season rolls around, we can reactivate it so that Bill can log back in and get back to work. By the way, if I save this with the record marked as inactive, The record that we were just looking at is going to be hidden from the operator list now, but we can view inactive operators within the list by turning on this inactive flag, and that way we can find it. It's going to be highlighted, highlit in this same color, and we can find it to edit it, open that up, and reactivate it and save it. Cool. With this header section behind us, we'll move on to the tabs themselves one by one, starting with the Details and Address tab. We won't spend too much time here though, because this tab is relatively straightforward, contains mostly contact information for the operator and fields for saving some other personal details and things like that. Nothing on this tab is required, so we could leave it all blank if we wanted to, but I would bet that most organizations would find it very useful to store at least some of this data for staff in their back office, even if it's just a contact number or an email address or something like that. A few of the other settings here though, this tab does contain some things like a linked file. That'll just open up the local file directory so that we can search for a file to attach to the operator record. Maybe attach something like an employee contract or their external employee file or something like that, and save that along with the operator record. We can also add an operator photo if we'd like to. We could capture a new photo or select one that we've got saved already. And this comment box is just an open text field, so we can add some miscellaneous notes about the operator here. I did skip over these flags: do not email me, do not SMS me. Obviously these can be used just for reference if the operator prefers not to be contacted via one of those methods, but actually enabling these flags, if we are then using the system's messaging component, it will stop the operator from receiving bulk emails or SMS messages that are sent from the system. So aside from just using these manually to referencing, hey, Bill doesn't actually want us to email him, so I won't. If these are on, they will prevent the system from sending messages via those means as well. Okay, moving on, we'll actually come back to this general tab last, because there's a handful of settings here that we should go through in detail, but the rest of these we can just overview for today. Throughout these remaining tabs though, including the general tab, there are a number of privilege flags and other settings that control what an operator can and cannot do. So many of these will be covered when we come back to them in their respective related lessons as required. For example, some of the basic stock control settings will be covered when we get to their topics. Marketing and promotion settings will be covered during those lessons, etc., etc. And in saying that, some of these just wouldn't make sense to go through yet until some further training is completed, or until we do get to those separate topics. Just to quickly overview the maintenance tab for now though, this contains a multitude of settings and configuration options here, predominantly in the form of privilege flags, but we do have a handful of drop downs here, as you can see, but they'll all be related to areas of the system and whether or not an operator can maintain their respective areas of the system. This tab is broken down into sections to make it a bit more manageable, including clusters of product maintenance related settings, a bit meta here with some operator maintenance related flags, some for suppliers, and accounts and memberships, and for scheduled billings. I will point out a handy little tool to make things quicker, although it should be used with a bit of caution, and that's the checkbox here next to each section's heading, which can be used just to quickly enable or disable all of the flags within the section with one click. Cool. Now the reason I say that should be used with caution, remember that not all of the flags do grant privileges. Some of them turn on restrictions, as I mentioned. So if you come into an operator record and think, oh, I want this operator to be able to do everything in the system, I'll just turn on every single flag, you will soon find out that you've actually enabled some restrictions and some of the restrictions will override a considerable number of other settings, but those specific ones that I'm referring to there are on this general tab. We'll get to them soon. So yeah, this is a handy tool to use. Just understand exactly what privileges and restrictions you might be turning on or turning off when doing so. Cool, but onto the stock control tab, which unsurprisingly contains several privilege settings relating to stock control, most of which are privilege flags, but there are some limit or restrictive configurations here also that we can see. For example, order limit and receiving limits. This tab also is broken down into subsections to make it a bit easier to locate what we're looking for, but everything related to an operator's ability to access stock control components and perform stock control functions throughout the system can be found here. Similar to that, Marketing and Promotions tab contains privilege flags all relating to an operator's ability to access, maintain, and perform activities relating to marketing and promotions. Important to note though is that this tab also includes operator privilege settings for messaging and for raffles and draws, so those have been included here on the Marketing and Promotions tab as well. Next up is our Reporting tab. You guessed it, contains flags relating to which reports an operator will have access to and being able to perform some other reporting related things such as maintaining views, if I can find that, views. And yeah, Till Privileges tab is a big one with lots of privilege settings and a few restriction settings here, all related to what an operator can do at the tills, including the ability to just operate tills in general, so we could turn that off if we just don't want an operator to be able to log into tills and use them at all. As we've come to expect now, this is further broken down into the following sections with correlating settings. We've got general, managers, voids and returns, accounts and discounts, tables, procedures, and till button privileges. Some, most, but not all of these will be covered throughout this course. Cool, alright, let's head back to the general tab. There are some very basic yet very, very powerful settings here that control if and how an operator can use back office. Some of these privilege flags on the right side control which back office components an operator will have the ability to see and or access. Some of these we've seen already in the system setup lesson, and some we'll get into in upcoming lessons, but some we won't. Either way, it's important to know that these can all be configured here to give an operator access to all of the system's operational and system setup components, which can all be found here in the side menu. The integration settings and the allowed venues dropdown are a bit higher level than what we'll be getting into in this course. But this default tree mode, this dropdown here, this is referring back to the lists that are found throughout back office, like the operator list, and how those lists are going to initially display by default for an operator if they do have a preference. Up to these general settings on the general tab, because we've saved some of the most powerful and most important settings for last. Of course, use back office is extremely important and does need to be on for an operator to be able to log into back office at all. And use back office compact mode in particular is a very powerful and useful setting. If this is on for an operator, any components that they do not have access to will be completely hidden, essentially giving them a back office light. For example, if we look at the operator settings, or the settings that we've got turned on for our operator bill here, we can see what they should and shouldn't have access to. And their number is 563, so I'll just need to remember that. And if I save Bill's record here and I log out and log back in, Cool. We can see that the back office menu here has been modified and abbreviated for them. Items that they don't have access to are just gone. So there's no longer any system setup components down here, no operational setup. Those menus are just completely gone. And within some of these submenus as well, anything that they would not have privileges turned on for are going to be hidden. Now if we log back out and back in as master setup, if I go in back to that operator record, if I can remember, there we go, and we turn compact mode off, log out, back in, cool. Now we can still see those areas of the system that our operator Bill does not have access to. They just will not be able to access them. They'll be presented with a warning prompt here just letting them know that their operator privileges do not allow them to perform this function, basically to access that area of the system. Basically just warning prompts at every turn for anything that they are not privileged to be able to access. Okay, anyway, back to master setup one last time. The final operator flag that we will look at today is the back office membership only. This actually predates and was the precursor to the concept of compact mode. So what this flag will do if it's on is it will restrict an operator from seeing anything in back office except for the membership component. So this was actually designed for operators whose job role required them to be able to maintain the membership list, but not to do anything else in back office. So that will have a similar effect to back office compact mode, where the only component that will be available is going to be for memberships. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about not just sort of willy-nilly turning on every single flag, because we could potentially, in most cases, be doing more harm than good if we just turned all of these general settings on and went through the tabs like that. We would have actually turned on those restrictive flags here as well. Okay, but anyway, the main takeaway from this Operators 101 lesson, aside from now knowing how to add operator groups and individual operator records, is that number one, we clearly have no shortage of operator settings. Each one controls a different aspect of what an operator can do in the system, whether it be to grant access to an area of back office or allow an operator to perform a certain task from SmartPause, or to restrict operators from doing certain things. And as there are potentially many different job roles in each organization, different privileges should be configured to different operators who have those different roles in the business. For example, we would not necessarily provide the operators in these waitstaff subgroups with the same privileges as operators in the stock control subgroups. An operator in finance would have different access than an operator in marketing, so on and so forth. Certainly the operators in the senior management group will most likely have more access than anyone else. Maybe even specific operators in that group will have their own individual privileges and not use group settings. But either way, what we are looking to do is to provide a means of consistency as well as a level of security throughout the system by being able to control which operators can do what. That will be it for this lesson though. We will again go through a lot more of these privileges and settings individually throughout upcoming lessons as we get to their respective topics. But that will be it for this lesson. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you in the next one.